Hello, good morning. I welcome you to another edition of Sunday Morning Dose. Here at Sunday Morning Dose, we look at God's Word from Christ's perspective. We usually say to ourselves here that for anything in the Bible to make sense to us as followers of Christ, it should have made sense to Christ. And that is the interest we protect here. That if it makes sense to Christ, it should make sense to us. And if it would not make sense to Christ, it shouldn't make sense to us. So today we'll continue on the series we started about beyond stories. That the narrations and the stories in the Bibles are beyond stories. They are embedded with so many truths and principles that we could apply into our various lives, and by that begin to get result. And our failure to do so has resulted to many people referring to the Bible, the stories, as fables. Of course, words are powerful. Even the literal books are powerful if believed. If believed means if you believe it and if you act according to the instructions in it. It is our belief and our actions to disbelief that actually activate the power in words. But over time, believers have not been able to believe to the point of even applying some of the principles. And then you would ask yourself, what should they believe? Is it just the stories or the principles? So we needed to have even be taught about some of these principles, and that is what we've not been taught. Many of us have considered stories in the Bible as something that happened and that's end, as something that happened, and we are looking for similar stories to occur, similar incident to occur, similar moment to occur in our lives where God will favor us for doing nothing, literally. And that is not God. And in fact, that is not even man. That man does not write things without putting a proper condition and proper principles, truths inside the word. That is what makes it valid. That as many would look at some of these truths and begin to do them, they will generate similar results or better results. And that is what we try to motivate ourselves with this series, looking at some of these stories that we know, or probably we don't know, we're just hearing for the first time, and seeing the lessons and principles that could apply or that can be applied to our various lives. So today we'll look at Genesis 26. For many religious folks, this story started in and God told Isaac to remain in the land, and ended in verse 12 where and God blessed Isaac and he reaped 100-fold. No, this story is beyond just that. And let's see, this story is beyond just that. It's embedded with so much principle that we must take note of. So I would encourage that you read Genesis 26, the whole chapter, to have the understanding of the story that happened there. And then what we just do here is just to pick some of the principles that we could apply to our lives and begin to apply them so as to enable us generate the result we would hope for. In Genesis 26 verse 2, the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Don't go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live." The Lord appeared to Isaac. So there was famine, and Isaac wanted to relocate like every other person. But the Lord appeared to Isaac, "Don't leave this place." So what is the lesson? The lesson here is that we must be able to have personal relationship with God. It's not enough to do what is right by majority. It's not enough. Isaac wanted to live just like every other person because there was famine. It was obvious that rain wasn't coming from the sky, and then he wanted to relocate. It's just pure sense. It's just proper sense. But in this case, God will instruct him against the majority. So there is need for us to have proper relationship with God. These instructions will not come if we have not developed personal relationship with God. Then the second thing we should take note, if we are moving out of religious principle now, is that we must be inspired to do things. It's not just enough that we see a lot of people doing them. It's not just enough that we see a lot of businesses, a lot of people going into a particular sector. We must be inspired. We must be inspired. Something must have inspired us. Some persons call that inspiration passion. I agree. It's something that should be a bit outside your control, a bit outside the control of your brain, a bit more emotional too, a bit more sentimental too, a bit more bigger than you. So you must be inspired to do things. You must be inspired to do things. It is when we are inspired, when we are motivated, when we are passionate about the things we do, that we could go all out in making sure that that thing succeed. This lifestyle of living to chances, of developing multiple options, is reflecting that we are not inspired. If you are inspired, you will keep your option narrow. We must be willing to begin to live life for something we are willing to die for. We must be willing to get to this point. This is the point that God would demand Isaac to get to the point where he is inspired. He's not just living in the land because he wants to, but because it's something that is beyond him. A passion could be beyond him. The passion to see a community, a space transformed could be beyond you. That is inspiration. That is enough. That is enough. And we must be inspired to do things and not just do things like every other person. Be inspired. So verse 3, stay in this land and I will be with you. I will bless you. I will give you and your descendants all these lands. I will keep the agreement I made to Abraham, your father. So it was not just that God instructed him, God gave him motivation. These are motivation. When we talked about the story of David and Goliath, we mentioned the principle of motivation. So that something should motivate you. It could start from material things, but it should not end at material things. It should go beyond you, go beyond just you and yourself and your family. It could transcend into a national impact, into global impact. But something should inspire you. So God knew that he had to give Isaac something to inspire him. He had to give Isaac something to inspire him. He has to give him a promise. He has to give him a vision. He has to give him something he will be interested about. So God gives motivation. God gives motivation. So be inspired. Get motivated. Get excited. Let the result that you hope for motivate you to go through the process. Get along or familiarize yourself with people who have paid the price to where you're going and see what they are enjoying, and let that motivate you. Let that inspire you to want to do more work, to want to do more training on your profession, to want to do more. Let that inspire you. Get motivated, get excited, get inspired. So verse 5, I will do this because your father Abraham obeyed me. He did what I said. He obeyed my commands, my teachings, and my rules. So your impact and your effect, your work with God would end not just with you, but would have effect even with your children. It will have effect on your children's children. It would have effect on your coming generations. So what is the clue for the for us, the spiritual or religious folks? It means that our price, or the price we pay in working with God, will not just end with us. The result will not just end with us. So God is promising Isaac, and he would mention why he had promised Isaac the things that he had promised Isaac, and not necessarily because of what Isaac had done, but because of what his father had done with him, the relationship between his father and God. So our work with God would have transgenerational effect, would have a generational effect at the long run. What does this mean also? It would also have effect with men. See, our lifestyle, the life and the pattern of life we choose to live would have effect in our children's life. So in verse 7, Isaac's wife Rebekah was very beautiful. The men of the place asked Isaac about her. Isaac said, "She's my sister." He was afraid to tell them she was his wife. He thought they might kill him so they could have her. So still talking about legacy, about the impact would have on generations to come. You know, if you are familiar with Abraham's story, you will realize that Abraham also did exactly what Isaac was doing in here. So lying has become a family trait. Lying has become a family trait. So Isaac too felt that is the idea to go about making sure that they do not kill him for the sake of Rebekah. You know, and then meaning our impact, still talking about our impact on our children, is the most effective thing to our children. The influence that a parent would have on their children is much more effective than any other thing, and we should not take this lightly. We should not take it as a joke. We must be able to model what we want to see in our children's life. We must be able to model it. At this point in time, nobody had to preach to Isaac. Isaac wasn't preached to by Abraham yet. Abraham had modeled this style to Isaac. Abraham had modeled this style to Isaac. So the question is, what are you modeling to your children? Because when they become that thing, eventually they are not going to consult your advice anymore. They are simply just going to do what you have modeled to them. What have you modeled, or what are you modeling your children to? So you hear statement like the child is not like me. No, the child is exactly you that you have modeled, exactly you. So in order to have impact on a child, the parent must know that they must first work on themselves, you know. And this portrays the point that Solomon would make, that teach a child the way he should go, and when he is a man, he will not depart from it. And this is what has happened here. Abraham had taught Isaac as a child what to do, in such situations like this. And when Isaac eventually becomes a man, and he is a man here, he actually literally just follows suit. So we must begin to watch the things that we teach our children. We must take it into deliberate thought. We must be deliberate about it. So in verse 12, this is where this scripture ends for majority of people, but this is where it just gets interesting. Isaac, in verse 12, Isaac planted seed in that land, and that year he gathered a great harvest. The Lord blessed him very much. So Isaac obeyed God, did according to the instruction of God, and got result. What is the principle? That when we obey God, we get result. See, when put God as the professional here, as the consultant here, when we go for superior thought for whatever aspect of our lives is, when we go for superior thought, whether it's in finances, whether it's in academics, whether it's in career, when we look for superior thought, what happens is that when we are able to follow the instructions and the suggestions, we would be assured that we will get result. Result is an offshoot of effort, a good effort. So result doesn't lie. If I want this video that you're seeing to stop, I simply just press the stop recording button and it stops. But as far as it's still recording, it's still capturing myself speaking, and that is the whole essence of result. Result too is a principle. So when we claim we are making a certain effort that is probably a positive effort and we are getting negative effort, then it means that we still have to, the result is a pointer to what we are still not doing right. To what we are still not doing right. Because once we are doing things right, once we are following our consultant, once we are obeying that health and hygienic advice, we would get results. When we are following that gym routine, we are going to get results. And if we are not getting the desired result, we should check the routines. We should check our program and schedules and see what we could do different from what we've been doing. So we must be able to follow through and see and get the feedback from the results we are generating. In verse 15, so they stopped up all the wells the servant of Isaac Father Abraham had dug. They had dug them when Abraham was alive. The Philistines filled those wells with dirt. Excuse me. And this is something that differentiates the first world countries to the third world countries. Let's consider Abraham and Abraham's servants as first world countries, and let's consider the Philistines as second world or third world countries. They created a solution. The solution was working, and after some time, the third world countries took over the solution and made it a dumping site. They converted it to dumping site. The least they could have done is to maintain it. That is the least they could have done, is to keep maintaining it, but rather they turned those wells to a dumping site. And that is what is still happening to third world countries till now. And that is what is still happening. And that is what the so-called believers, Christians, should be doing. We should be looking at these dumping sites and begin to recreate the values that were in it in the first place. So we would see what value was in the wells in the first place. What values were in those wells? In verse 18, so another lesson we must take note is that God does not just disclose the result without telling us the principles, the guidelines that got the result. And what we are looking at now were the things that Isaac had to do, or the things Isaac did that enabled the result he got in Genesis 26 verse 12 to happen. And that those are the things that we are looking at now. So in verse 18, long before this time, Abraham had dug many wells. After Abraham died, the Philistines filled them with dirt. So Isaac dug those wells again. He gave them the same names his father had given them. So Isaac looked at the same value that the Philistines had converted into dumping sites and helped in recreating those values again. He helped in recreating and bringing out the values in those wells again. Is it not similar to what we should be doing in our nation? That our nation has been converted to a dumping site. It's been a dumping site. And is that not what we should be doing? That we should be looking at the sectors of businesses or the sectors of values that we have converted into dumping sites and begin to reshape and begin to bring out those values yet again out of those sectors. That is exactly what we should be doing. That is exactly what Isaac did. That is exactly what Isaac did. So Isaac looked for the wells that his father had dug and couldn't find any. Couldn't find any. The easiest route which he wanted to, which he was about taking before, was to exit this place. This place has been converted to dumping site, and that's what many of us are doing. We are exiting our dumping site. We are exiting our nation to somewhere better. But Isaac will be instructed by God not to go that route. So you would think Isaac would just consider that God will do everything. No. See, when God gives us instructions on what to do, it gives us the things that we must do. So God does not just give something that we must do and does not give ways to get it done. Isaac got an idea. Let me look for the wells that my father had dug. My father also had similar experience, went through similar experience. What did he do? He dug wells. Where are the wells? Where are the wells? They've been converted to dumping sites. So Isaac dug those wells again. Isaac dug those wells again. But the men who herded sheep in Gerar argued with Isaac's servant. They said, "This water is ours." So Isaac named that well Argue, because they argued with him. So results is what many people are interested about. Results is what many people are interested about. Not necessarily interested in the process. They are not interested in making sure that they clean up those places from dumping sites into the values yet again, into the value site yet again. They are just interested in the result. So when they saw the result, that well, water is coming out of this well, they argued with Isaac. They argued with Isaac, and they said they claimed it. They claimed the result. So you should not be bitter when result brings about many contrasting interests or many opposition. You should not feel bitter. Here is what Isaac would do. 28, they answered, now we know that the Lord is with you. We will make a promise to you, and we would like you to make one to us. We would like to make an agreement with you. So what Isaac did, this is verse 28, but if you read before then, what Isaac did was that, since I knew how to generate this result, I am inspired to stay in this land. I have gotten an idea of how to generate water, and it's by finding the wells that my father had dug and digging some. So Isaac went ahead and started digging wells. So it was this idea, and this idea sounds so strange to them that they felt like, wow, he's a mysterious person. He has a mystical power. And that is how we are supposed to be, until they know, or we are able to teach people what we are doing. Mystical, mysterious. Not to us. A believer is not supposed to be, not to find God's doing mysterious. He is supposed to understand it. But to people who are not believers, yes, they should find it magical or mystical or mysterious to them. So they after some time, they stopped arguing with Isaac based on wells, and they started acknowledging that this guy knows something. He's probably with a force. They come to a conclusion that this guy has a force behind him that is inspiring him to generate the kind of result that he's getting. So what they did was to come into an agreement with him. So where the Bible says, when the Lord is at peace with a man, even his enemy will be at peace with him. So what they did was to come into agreement with Isaac, because the way he's going is going to be a great person. Remember, there was famine in the land. Famine means there was no rain, and there was no food crops from the ground. Now this guy is controlling the major source of famine. There is another system of farming by irrigation. That is where we are going. How did Isaac, despite the fact that there was no rain, generate 100% result in plantation and in harvest that year? Is because Isaac discovered another way of farming through irrigation. Isaac discovered another way of farming through irrigation. According to Wikipedia, irrigation is the agricultural process of applying controlled amounts of water to land to assist in the production of crops, as well as to grow landscape plants and lawns, where it may be known excuse me, as watering. Agriculture that does not use irrigation but instead relies only on direct rainfall is referred to as rain-fed. Irrigation has been a central feature of agriculture for over 5,000 years and has been developed independently by many cultures across the globe. Then, according to encyclopedia, irrigation farming, the raising of agricultural crops under conditions of irrigation. It is one of the most intensive types of farming, and it developed in desert, semi-desert, and arid zones, and in regions that have inadequate moisture at certain times of the growing season. So this is what Isaac discovered, that he discovered another farming apart from rain-fed, but called irrigation. Another way to farm, to direct water to farm, since the plant needs water. However the water comes is not the issue. Once the water can get to the farm, then the plant is good to go. And he discovered another way. Was through inspiration discovered another way of doing farming. So verse 32, let's end this. The day Isaac's servant came and told him about the well they had dug, they said, "We found water in that well." If you read this story in KJV, for the sake of this teaching, we've read this in ICB, International Children's Bible. But if you read it in KJV, if you read it in NKJV, you would understand why this 32 was a news and why it has to be a principle. Because up until now, Isaac had to be out there with them to find water. So it was as if Isaac was doing magic. It was as if Isaac had to go with them every time to find water. He had to go with, practically have to be present at the place of digging to find water. But this was the first time in this passage that the servant would come back to Isaac to the fact that they could find, now they now can find water on their own. Meaning Isaac had turned what many people call anointing into an institution. Isaac, thank God he turned it into an institution. What that means is that he taught his servant the principle. For legacy to continue, it must be taught. For secrets to keep living, must be taught. For principles to keep living, it must be taught. Isaac had taught these principles to his servant, so his servant could now generate result even without him. And this is what many people will consider the best place to be as a business person. You know, in the cash flow quadrant, the four cash flow quadrant, Robert Kiyosaki will advise that the ultimate goal that you should be is at the point of business person and investor. And why would he advise that? Because you would not necessarily need to be present at the place of digging for you to have returns. So Isaac had become not just a self-employed, but a business person, and at this point an investor. He had invested into the lives of his servant, and now his servant could generate similar results that he would have generated on the field. So I hope this inspires you to begin to see these stories beyond stories, to begin to see these stories as concrete and critical part of human existence, to draw lessons, principles from it. If books written by men, this is also written by men, for it was inspired. But if books could have impact on people, if Think and Grow Rich could be written and could have impact, how much more this? If The Richest Man in Babylon could have impact, a particular book has had impact on my life, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and is still having on my life. If Rich Dad Poor Dad could have impact on my life, how much more Bible? But for any book to have impact, for any thought to have impact, the principles must be taught, beliefs must be inserted on those principles, and actions must come. Action must take place for it to have any meaning. And these are the vital three process that we must apply to these stories and narrations in the Bible to make sure that it's beyond fables, it's beyond stories. Till we see some other time, same station next week. This is Sunday Morning Dose. The narrations in the Bible, they are beyond stories. They are.